Paul Nunesdea. I'm a certified professional facilitator from the IAF, which stands for International Association of Facilitators. Since 2018, I've started a book series on architecting collaboration, and my latest book, in co-authorship with Martin Duffy and other renowned digital facilitators and guest co-authors, is titled Beyond Virtual Meetings. It's all about the importance of the digital tools that can extend and augment the power of you as a facilitator and a meeting host in virtual online meetings, but also on the hybrid meetings that are going to be so much needed in this post-pandemic era. Along with my co-author Martin Duffy and esteemed PhD colleague, we host Talk to Your Meeting Daughters, a series of hosted conversations with meeting experts that can advise you about how to transition to this new normal and take advantage of this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make the organization of your meetings more sustainable and effective. Please stand by as the next show will start momentarily.
Hey, welcome everybody. It's so good to be here with all of you again this month, and it's a pleasure to be here again with you, Martin.
Yeah, good to see you again, Paul, and lovely to have our two guests, Alex and Jim, with us as well.
Welcome, Alex. Welcome, Jim. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Privileged to be on stage with Alex as well.
Oh, and the reverse is true. Thank you very much for the invitation.
And we normally start our conversations with a very, very odd question, Martin, right?
Yeah, just Jim, you might have had this one fielded at you in our previous episodes, but Alex, we normally start off by inviting our guests perhaps to share something with us and our other listening guests, something that about yourself that may not be very well known.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, I'll take this one. So I started my career as a young engineer working on a manufacturing plant. And one of my first job, I was hired by 3M, the American company, and I was a Six Sigma black belt, so I was optimizing projects in the plants. And one of my first projects as a Six Sigma black belt was to optimize Post-it notes.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm a facilitator, and you know that Post-it notes are the facilitator's best friend. And you also know that I created a tool to replace the paper Post-it notes with virtual ones.
Excellent. I like it. I see you've adopted your Post-it notes on your back wall there as well, Alex.
Yeah, I use them a lot.
Excellent.
I have a price because my wife, she's still working at 3M.
Oh. Excellent. And Jim, maybe a different nugget from the last time?
Yeah, sure. So early in my career, I actually studied library science, and I was a librarian for a brief period of time.
Oh, cool. Interesting. How did you start in that?
Back at that time, the internet was just starting to become a thing, and people were getting online accounts and email addresses and things like that for the first time. And I was right near I was in the School of Communication, which was right next door to the library and the library school. And I just started to know people and hang out. And I said, oh, this is interesting. So it was just it was adjacent to where I was anyway.
Yeah. Super. Yeah. Well, our topic today, guys, is we're interested in exploring the idea of, can technology make meetings redundant? The theme that we picked up, it partly coming from our last conversation last month. We kind of zoned in a little bit on AI, highly topical at the moment. Alex, a particular area of expertise for yourself. Jim, an area that with your slightly wider lens or hat on your head that you're no doubt immersing more and more into. But we thought rather than just focusing on AI, we might look at it initially from the broader technology perspective. And if it brings us down the AI route, we'll go where the conversation takes us. So can meetings be made redundant by using more and more technology?
That's a good question, right?
Mm.
I have a first question for you. Sorry, you're asking me a question, but I have one for you.
It's okay.
Because technology, anything can be technology. I mean, there is high technology, there is low technology. I mean, I use card decks a lot in my facilitation practice, and this is technology. So in the scope of this meeting, are we limiting ourselves to high technology, or do we consider any kind of tool?
Interesting. Yeah, fair point. Or should we consider both? Or maybe you could reframe the question, Jim, if you looked at it from the point of view saying, at what point could or can technology make meetings redundant? Because Alex, as I'm inferring from what you're saying, like we use technology in our meetings all the time. We're using it right now, this moment. But could this make the meetings redundant?
Yeah.
So maybe it's a question of degree.
Okay. My viewpoint would question. I'm going to ask a question back to them too, Alex. I guess is why are we focusing on meetings being made redundant? And the kind of the subtone that I hear in the question is that meetings are something that are potentially ripe for being made redundant, or they're worthy of being made redundant. So my question is, well, what's wrong with meetings in general that we want to even make them or talk about them being redundant, right? So I think, I mean, in that context, as Alex said, any technology can help make meetings redundant. I don't know if it's about redundant or for me, I think meetings need to evolve into something different, right? And if that's the starting point, then you can say, well, what's the job of a meeting? Why do people even need to meet, and how else might that get done? And as Alex said, there's lots of different technologies that might come into play.
And by the way, meeting in itself is a technology. It's a tool to meet. And by the way, it's such a wide term that this is why we have so many problems with meeting, because there is no point in meeting if you're meeting without a purpose. So we should call that something else. And as soon as you call it something else, you're going to end up having productive meetings instead of just meetings.
Right. Yeah. And Alex, in fact, that's the very first thing. I just jotted some notes here to myself as we were chatting before the show. And the first thing I wrote was purpose. And the analogy that I make, and I think I made this on the show once as well, too. If you look at agile practices, Scrum and other types of agile motions, they have a lot of meetings and rituals and touch points for a meeting, for a team to come together. But they don't call them, we're having a meeting. They all have a name. We're doing a grooming session. We're doing a stand-up. We're doing a retrospective, right? And I think to Alex's point, I think that's part of the problem with meetings today is people just call meetings, right? And they're generic and they're kind of handing them out like candy, right? Here's a meeting, there's a meeting, and then include an agenda. And it's like, well, why would you have to include an agenda if the purpose was inherent in that gathering, right? So I think it's our attitude towards meetings that need to change. I think technology certainly shifts things around, right? Just the fact that we can have this conversation here pretty fluidly is an amazing thing in and of itself, and so we can talk about the future of that. But I think taking the meeting wrapper off and having these gatherings that inherently have a purpose to them, right? I think is I think that's key. But without that, though, you know, one of the terms that I was playing around with was something like co-creating sessions. You know, because we don't want to meet, we want to do something together. So name it something that's, you know, it's a co-creating session that we're doing, right? And give it a purpose by default.
So
Yep.
this is something I was thinking also about. So I like co-creating, but the question we could ask is, some meetings could be relevant even if they are only for communication. Okay, I don't know. But you have several big, broad scope of purpose that you could use the tool meeting for. There is communication,
Yeah.
and there is collaboration. But I prefer the way you phrase it as co-productions or co-conception or co-designing stuff. And there is feedback. So you have communication, descendant, feedback, upstream, and collaboration, peer-to-peer. And I don't see other kinds of interactions, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that there could be three relevant purposes for a meeting. There could be a meeting to communicate stuff, a meeting to ask feedback, and a meeting to co-create stuff. Okay. The problem is right now, most of the meetings are on the communication type, but they are hidden. Okay. And they are not done well. But I don't think that communication meeting should be thrown away, as some people say. It should be asynchronous collaboration, asynchronous communication only, etc. I think there could be some use case for descendant. But at least if you recognize that, okay, I'm going to do a descendant meeting, I'm going to do a feedback meeting, and I'm going to do a co-designing meeting. Once you start doing that kind of stuff, your meetings are going to be much better, because you are aware of how you are going to use the tool meeting for what kind of big purpose.
They're not only going to be much better, they're going to be quite different as well, Alex, aren't they? Because what we are going to do with meeting as a tool, now the how we apply that tool is now necessarily going to be quite different. So a communication meeting, meaning transmit, send out a message, versus a co-creation meeting, Jim, to take your example.
We call that workshops. And there is a name for that, workshops.
Technology, if we overlay technology on all of these ideas, is technology going to make them redundant? Or
so as I was saying, there is a big trend, or whatever you want to call it, about asynchronous collaboration replacing meetings. Okay, and I'm a big proponent of asynchronous collaboration. I mean, I've transformed. I've done my first one in 2013 with 200 people instead of a workshop, doing it asynchronously, etc. So I really like this kind of work. But I hate binary representation of the world. Okay, and again, as I said, you have descendant, feedback, and peer-to-peer. These are three models, and you can combine them. But there is the same. You have synchronous and asynchronous. And in order to accomplish a purpose, you could combine them. And sometimes, maybe you totally replace the meeting with an asynchronous communication. But maybe you make a first communication synchronously to all your employees, and you add some asynchronous stuff on top of that. So you combine all these modalities of collaborating with your teams.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as a binary stuff.
I agree. And I think we can say meetings could be shorter, and they're certainly going to be different. I don't know if they're going to be made completely redundant. And one model that I was looking at recently, I've been following this trend for a while now. There's this notion of the flipped classroom in education. where with the prevalence of online learning platforms and videos and things like that, they flipped the traditional model of the classroom. Used to be as a student, you go to the lecture and the professor's up front, often reading like yellow page notes because they've been teaching the same thing for 20 years, and they communicate the ideas and the theory to you, and you sit passively. You're in a group of people. You're not talking to them. You're not talking to the professor. You're just sitting there taking notes, right? The flipped classroom is you do the lecture. Oh, and then, by the way, you go home and you do your homework and you do all the activity alone, right? So we get together to listen and we go home to work by ourselves. Well, we can flip that around and we can say, you listen to the lecture on your own, or you somehow consume it through notes or video or something like that. And then when I get together, then I have a discussion and I work with my colleagues, right? So the traditional model of the classroom has flipped. That didn't make the classrooms redundant. It just completely changed the nature of those. And we can imagine that for workshops and for meetings as well too. Because think about a typical meeting is, Alex's model of communication. Let's say you got a half an hour, right? Somebody communicates for 20 minutes. And then they say, well, what do you guys think? And you have 5 minutes to discuss before you have to wrap up. Well, what if that was flipped and you came in and it was, okay, everybody read, the topic. Let's talk about this for 20 minutes. And you flip that. And I think so the role of technology there is these days, we can record ourselves on video or audio and make things available in the cloud easily to consume in advance, right? But that requires an async habit. Right, that only works if everybody does it, right?
Exactly what I was wanting to say. It's a change management project that you need to do.
yeah, totally. Because async is only as good. Async is only as good as the consumption of async, right? So if I'm leading a meeting, it's easy for me to say, "Here, read these 5 things in advance." But if I don't have a culture within my team and my company that people are going to show up and they're going to be prepared, right? Because if you remember in the old model was, I didn't have to prepare. I went in the meeting and that's where I got the information, right? They're doing it for me, right? But now you got to come up, you better be prepared. That's a cultural shift right there.
So I fully agree. And I had this conversation so many times with my clients. So when I prepare and design a workshop, in the prep meetings, I often found that my clients, they want to put too much things into little time. Okay, so they have to prioritize. And something always come up is, what if we send materials before? And I tell them, in theory, it's a good idea. And maybe in 12 months or in 18 months, if we train everybody to work differently and to use asynchronous working as a kind of interaction, maybe we will be able to do it. But if we do it in 2 weeks in our workshop, something like in France, I'd say that 15% of the participants would have read the materials before, and maybe 5% only seriously.
Right.
So yeah, it's there are new ways, there are novel ways to do meetings, I think, and incorporating asynchronous interaction is one of the biggest things we can achieve. But you need to manage that it's a cultural change that you need to manage within the organization. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And you know why. 2 years later on LinkedIn, you're going to see some posts, well, asynchronous work doesn't work.
Right.
You see? Each time you have a new trend, people try to apply it without being smart. Yeah.
Are we essentially saying then that to optimize the use of technology in pursuit of our meetings, we actually need to bring about a fundamental culture shift in our thinking, and 2, in our practices around meeting and how we meet? Is that the logic?
I think it is. I mean, we've been, sleepwalking around offices for, decades now with this model of, I'm going to stand up and go over there and I'm going to get the presentation over there, the regular meeting thing. And we have to really rethink that habit, and that behavior has to fundamentally change. I think technology can accelerate that, But ultimately, when you talk about change management, it's not the technology that changed, it's people, right? All change management is people change, right? So there are new habits and expectations that come with that. And I think, once you apply new technologies, even if it's something as simple as a video recording, meetings can get a lot shorter. They're not only different in nature, but they can be shorter and fewer in number. So I don't think technology is going to, we don't have to meet at all. I think you'll still have that, but it won't be, long periods of time where, nothing relevant is happening and things like that. There'll be fewer meetings and they'll be shorter. Yeah. At least that's the ideal state, right?
Yeah. So as with any change, you will have to have a strong champion within the organization, and you would have all the managers to be aware about it, and you would have to enforce the habit at the beginning. So instead of saying, oh, you didn't read the material before, okay, you will have to make it as a rule, a strong rule, something like that, especially at the beginning. Right. And then at some point, it's going to become ingrained as a habit. Right. People are going to see the benefits. And also, I mean, you have to make sure that it is feasible, because if everybody is overwhelmed by their projects and they are invited to hundreds of cross-functional meetings, projects where they have meetings and they have to read materials, well, it won't work. So yeah, it's a complex stuff. But of course, technology make it possible. So it's an enabler, but it's not the transformer. Okay.
That's an interesting.
So that's why it's feasible in a company like Slack, because I mean it's their tool, so it totally aligns with everything that they consider asynchronous to be the main mode of interaction. But in a typical company, it won't be the case.
But let me, Martin, if I may, just throw something here to the equation, because I'm listening to this wonderful conversation, and thinking about synchronous versus synchronous work. And we are talking about meeting as a technology, and now I'm throwing to the table space as a technology. So imagine the gathering that we need to have a group to spend a whole day thinking about something, but the meeting invite will say that they need to arrive 1 day in advance just to be together, to go to the pool, having coffee, prepare, reading the materials. Then the second day they meet, then perhaps it's still a third day for follow-up actions. Like instead of having 1 day, we need to have 3 days, but this will only work if we all share the same physical location, right?
Yeah.
So could space be a meeting technology?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely believe it is. And I also believe the quality and the nature of the collaboration space affects the quality and the nature of the collaboration outcomes. Space. Of course, I work for Mural, and we're a spatial tool, right? And I would describe the space that we occupy here a virtual space, right? Right now we have video and audio and chat, I guess. And it's so when you talk about online or virtual spaces, it's usually a collection of touch points and tools that come together, and that defines that digitally defined workspace. But that makes a huge difference in how and when you're going to even be able to collaborate. And I think there's change that needs to happen there as well too, and leverage the tools that we have better and things like that. But space is definitely a factor in the equation.
And how you organize the space within the space, well, that's part of the design of any kind of meeting or workshop.
Yeah.
And by the way, speaking of the technology, when you're speaking about space, I'm also thinking about large group meetings. And one of the problems with large group meetings is how you make cross-pollination something. So cross-pollination is when I say something and then Jim hears what I'm saying and it gives him another idea, etc., etc. So that's cross-pollinating. So when you have a big room, how do you make all people cross-pollinate together, because they don't have the opportunity speak to each other. So this is where technology can be an enabler again, because if you make them discuss by group of threes, for example, and you give them one iPad or one of them use their mobile phone to enter the ideas in something like Stormz, for example, then instantly this idea is becoming visible on all the mobile phones of all the other groups of threes or six. And maybe they can read the idea and then it's going to cross-pollinate like that. So again, and it's the same thing for everything. By the way, it's the same thing for AI. I never see technology as a replacement for any human activity. I see that either as an enabler or as something to augment our capabilities. By the way, that's what tools have been since prehistoric times. Okay, a hammer is a way to augment our ability to nail something. So well, it's the same with all the other tools. It's the same for the digital collaboration tools such as Mural or Stormz. It's the same with AI. I don't see AI as a way to replace human. I have not seen any good enough automation that totally replace a human activity right now. But I have seen AI used as a way to help people be a little bit more creative, for example. So yeah, this is to say it's an enabler and it augments our capabilities, our capacities to collaborate.
It's interesting. So actually, I'm just thinking here, Alex, as you're making that particular point, that technology is not a replacer, it's an enabler. If I just wind my head back here 10 years, roughly plus or minus 10 years, and I'm thinking back to WhatsApp, I'm thinking back to the development of Facebook, I'm thinking back to the way that technologies, plural, as they have evolved and emerged, the ways in which we have come to meet, both socially and professionally in work settings, have progressively changed, or seem to have progressively changed. So my question is, let me go back to the culture shift that both of you said is necessary in order to optimize the benefits or the advantages of technology. Do you feel that culture shift has started, or is it necessary but hasn't yet started? Where are we at, do you think, with that culture shift to get the optimum out of technology if it's not going to replace meetings but to support or help meetings?
I think we're at the start line, and some people have stepped over the start line, but we're very early in the beginning. I think there's still a lot we have to learn about the mix of synchronous and asynchronous communication, for instance, and patterns and habits and behaviors. Certainly right now it's something that it requires extra thought, and you have to be intentional about it, which is a good thing, but it's not something that has been ingrained into us like the way that we understand the office meeting of the past. There's a lot of ins and outs that we still have to learn.
Yeah, and I would add that personally, I'm very pessimistic because I've been in the business for a long time now. And when I was beginning to market Stormz, I was reading studies about meetings don't work and X% of meetings are boring and whatever. And I was using that in my marketing to say we need to change, blah, blah, blah. And 12 years later, still the same. And I look at how they work in big companies right now. They are still doing their meetings the same way they were doing the meeting when I was at 3M in year 2000, so 24 years ago. So I'm very pessimistic because all of us, and those who are going to listen to the recording, we live in an echo chamber. Okay. You heard me speaking about asynchronous, synchronous, descendant, ascendant, peer-to-peer, but I mean the normal employee, they've never heard about that, and they've been doing their meetings, and it's going to continue for the next 10 years. okay? And we're gonna see a lot of people on LinkedIn saying we need to change the way meetings, blah, 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 but in 10 years, it's gonna be the same shit. Sorry, I'm very pessimistic. The only thing that has really changed, this is COVID. And because COVID was a change trigger. You can say that like that?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
It forced a change. I'm using to say that COVID was able to do in 2 months what I was unable to do in 10 years with Stormz. Okay. And so everybody suddenly started to realize that they could do some workshops online. So now even in big companies, they are doing video conferencing, and they are not they are doing some quite complex stuff with video conferencing. But change happened only because we have an event of the size of COVID. Can you imagine?
But boy, I thought my answer was pessimistic until I heard your answer. I was putting us at the starting line. But Alex, the reason why I'm hopeful is exactly what you said, because we had the zombies of pre-pandemic walking through the office, right? And then suddenly pandemic shook everything up. Right now, a lot of companies, particularly large organizations, are trying to figure out the post-pandemic world. And my hope there is that there's now this intentionality that they bring to the table, because they have to. Right? Everybody might not be together from Mondays and Fridays, or all of these things. So what I'm seeing is there are people that are they're starting to line up on the starting line. Alex, would you agree with that? That we're getting ready to go in a different direction.
Okay, I'll take that positive thought. Yeah, I want to be. I hate to be pessimistic, because this is not my natural state of mind. But it's just that I've seen the same articles for 20 years now.
But it's like that idea of COVID being a driver of a change that some have been working toward or trying to achieve for years and years and didn't appear to be successful. If we take it if we looked at it from a generational perspective, if we look at and take the technology piece, so I'm not of the smartphone era. Okay, so I grew up with no phone era, a string and a can, going between my house and my friend's house 2 doors down from us, and that was how we communicated when we were 8 and 12-year-olds, because we read it in a science book. So I'm wondering, is there a generational thing here, where the current generation of kids, say from our 8, 10-year-olds through to say our current crop of mid-20-year-olds, so that group of people who have grown up with the smartphone in their hand, who are going through college now, meeting, inverted commas, meeting in their college activities in a completely different way to what you or I or the rest of us would have done. Is this just a generational thing that we just need to work through the generations, and it will have its technology will have its day? It won't replace the need for humans to meet, but it will absolutely fundamentally change the ways in which we interact when we meet. Is that where we're at?
So maybe we're going to have more asynchronous behaviors because of WhatsApp and stuff like that. But you will still have the other problems: no agenda, no purpose, which are the fundamental problems. Because again, asynchronous is just a tool. Okay, it's a way to better do one part of the task. Okay. So
I was going to say, allow me to be pessimistic here now on this one. I mean, part of the problem is, those kids that grew up with a cell phone or a mobile phone in their hand and then go out into the workforce, unfortunately, they're going to be sucked into large organizations that do have a lot more history. It's kind of like the Borg, right? They get assimilated to the Borg, right? And here you are, an intern or, junior, whatever your title is, and you're in a room with, 10 other people who have done meetings the way they're doing it there for 20 years. All of that, Gen Z or whatever the new generation is, all that behavior that you were describing, Martin, is like that just gets wiped away. So it really is the big shift that we need. I think over time though, you'll start to see a shift, but it's not going to happen that quickly just because we have a new generation of workers.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, it could be faster, it could be slow. Because Jim, in what you say there, you prompt me to go back to one of my own hobby horses about meetings, and that is that I'm not aware of any undergraduate or even postgraduate program in any college that I've come across where meetings are a topic that are presented as a start off with the purpose, guys. Start off with, once you've fixed the purpose, the methodology that you choose to use.
No, but this is so important. I've been saying that again. Sorry, but I've been saying that for a long time. I don't understand why the first training that you should go through when you enter any company, because it hasn't been done in as a student, is a facilitation training. Every single employee should be trained to facilitation. And I don't say that because I have a training, which I don't, by the way. That I could. Anyway, every single employee is going to participate to thousands of meetings in his life. They have never been trained in doing that. There is very little collaboration at student level, etc. So I don't understand why any company, university should have facilitation as the first mandatory training. That's the most important stuff. It's totally transversal. It's going to serve every single employee at all the level of a company. And it's probably the best potential of productivity improvement for the company, just by doing a facilitation white company training program. And no one is doing that.
Why, Alex? Why, Jim? Why are they not doing what's self-evident?
Yeah, I mean, I face this all the time in my work here at Mural. It's not on anybody's radar. Who's in charge of teamwork and collaboration, and what budget do they have, and how do you show ROI of that? I completely agree with Alex. I think it's, they talk about productivity, but nobody ever measures productivity, by the way. They just talk about it. But anyway, if you say, hey, if you made a pitch like Alex just pitched, this is the most important thing for your company, who are you going to be pitching it to? How are they going to afford that? Because there's no budget for that. And then they're going to say, how do I measure that and show the ROI of that, right? And these are tricky things to navigate in a large organization. And then the conversation just kind of evaporates, even though we're strongly convicted to that. And I completely agree with Alex. Again, it lands on the deaf ears of a large cyborg.
Definitely, but
that would be so easy to. I mean, that's probably the lowest hanging fruit to get productivity results. And innovation, not only productivity, creativity, innovation.
Now you're talking.
Cultural shifts, everybody getting with each other, peace in the world. Sorry.
Dear friends, we are about to conclude in a few minutes, I think, and I would like to throw you something still to the table for, so to say, last reflection. Because Martin, I know you remember we had in the show Michael Wilkinson. He has a large firm that specializes in do that kind of training. Alex, you suggest needs to be mandatory. I'm not sure that it could be a real-world evidence study to demonstrate that the kind of training that Michael Wilkinson provides actually impacts organizational productivity. I'm sure that a study like this could be useful for setting these as a mandatory training for all. But the question that I would like, or something, a story that I would like to share with you guys was in the spirit of having this space as a technology. You know, I was part of the IAF board 3 or 4 years ago, just before COVID. And one of the major expenses that our association has is the board meeting, because once a year the board has to physically meet all together, and we are a global association. Some board members are from Australia. I was from Spain. Some people travel from the US. You know, imagine the cost of having these 10, 12 people gathered together in Kuala Lumpur for 3 days, right? So it's really expensive. Now that's something that then the COVID appears, and then our colleagues were forced. I left the board in the meantime to have this, you know, meeting digitally, right? So the point is that I'm not sure, because I didn't follow up, but can digital technology, you know, and tools like Mural and Stormz be used in a way, in a fashion that, even though we are not physically together, we can experience the same quality of thinking, of collectively engaging, as if we were physically meeting? So that the point is then, can digital technology be a replacer for physical meetings, you know?
Again, I don't think it's going to be a replacement. I think it's complementary. I think you can meet more thanks to remote meetings, but it doesn't have to replace the physical meetings, because you don't get the same kind of interactions, obviously. But instead of doing once a year, you can do 6 a year. Okay, and you don't have, by meeting more frequently, exchanging your ideas more frequently, you're going to get much more value out of it, especially if you keep the annual in-person meeting for the IAF members. Okay, and then, yes, of course, this is why I built Stormz. This is what Mural is also doing. By the way, Mural and Stormz have been created at the same time in 2011. I don't know, that's and I think Miro too.
Yeah.
So that's funny to think about that. I built this tool especially for that, because I was frustrated not being able to do the collaborative part of the interaction with remote meetings. So I was adding the tool that was the enabler to exchange ideas, vote on ideas, diverge, converge, cluster, and do all this kind of stuff. So it was the enabler that now remote meetings can be more than communication meetings. They can also be collaboration meetings. Okay, so this is why I created this technology, and I guess it's the same for Mural. So yes, the technology enables to be able to do meetings virtual, but I don't think they should replace in-person meetings. I think they should complement each other's. That's all.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry.
No, I agree with that. In fact, back in 2015, I gave a webinar here at Mural on five tips for remote meetings. The first one was meet in person. Right? Why? Because all remote communication is so much easier once you meet in person, right? The question I would have though is, okay, now, you know, particularly after COVID, we've all kind of learned how to do the remote thing. We all know where the mute button is by now and things like that, right? The question is then, what's the purpose of that face-to-face meeting? And I think the prevalence of online interactions and all the requisite technologies that go with it, I think it potentially shifts the focus, so we can spend more time on creativity together. We can spend more time on getting to know each other together, right? Maybe, networking. Maybe the time we need together is even shorter, right? Because we can have a pre and a post game kind of, you know, motion as well too. So I don't think it replaces it, but it does change the nature of it, and that nature could be a positive, right? Just think about it. We can spend more time creatively together, or more time socially together, networking, right? Those are good things, and I think that's the real key. It's not about, hey, we have new technologies, you know, AI and all these new things coming out as VRs on, you know, coming up soon, a lot slower, but that's there too. I don't think it's like, oh, this is going to replace that. I think the question is, how does that change the nature of what we're currently doing. And in some cases, it might change it so dramatically you don't even recognize it anymore. But I still think it's not about the replacing. I don't think it's about swapping one out for the other.
Yeah, and I think that I made a post about the new skills for facilitators in 2023, and it's going to be the same for the next 5 years, is that your toolbox is expanding. Okay, but when I say toolbox, I'm not speaking of tools, software or stuff like that. I'm speaking that the modalities are expanding. So now when you want to organize a workshop, you have to think what's going to happen in person, what's going to happen remotely, what's going to happen synchronously, and what's going to happen asynchronously. And all these 4 kinds of modalities, you are going to use them as Lego bricks to design your workshop. And I also say the workshop is not in the room anymore, and it's not only in the day. It's before, it's after, it's in the room, it's outside the room. And you have to use and combine all these elements when you design a great workshop in 2024.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Great concluding point there. We're just up on time, guys. It's our normal practice that I try to do a 1 minute or a minute and a half very quick summary of just some of the key points that came out of our conversation. We started off, Alex, you raised an initial opening question to my question, which was technology. What do we mean by technology? What types of technologies are we talking about that impact meetings? Jim, you countered saying, what is it about meetings that potentially could even make them reduce? Why would we think that particular way? Both of you took us to a real fundamental, and this has been a recurring theme across many of our episodes at this stage, that meetings without purpose are a complete waste of time. Therefore, if we don't set the purpose, then the technology is almost irrelevant. So coming back to basics, that's the first key point as a takeaway, to say, we'll be absolutely clear what the purpose of your meeting is. But once you start fixing purpose, and Alex, you took us down the road of saying, we can have types of meetings. So is it feedback? Is it co-creation? Is it communication? Or are there other broad types of meetings that we would have? Once we've fixed on those, we then start considering synchronous versus asynchronous. Do we have to be all in the same place, same time, or can we be apart and separate chronologically or time-wise, as well as physically? And the answer is technology can help us to be both synchronous and asynchronous, which is part of that last point, Alex, that you've just made there. Jim, you took us into the flipped classroom, which I thought was a really interesting concept and a really interesting idea to now extrapolate out into our meetings as such. So we say, rather than, will we come together to communicate, to share documents and so on, well, let's do all that before we ever get together. And now the time together, we now have the possibility to use that in a much more productive and enhanced way. And technology, again, can support us and help us with building that interaction and engagement when we are physically together. Having said all of that, we actually moved then to recognize that moving in that direction would actually require a culture shift in the mindsets of the leaders in many, many organizations, because we're creatures of habit. Both of you made the point that when we go into an organization, even for people coming fresh out of college now, kids who have mobile phones as an integral part of themselves, they go into an old school organization run by people of my generation, and all of a sudden they're just reverted back to stuff 20 and 30 and 40 years old, instead of having recalibrated what's our purpose, having recalibrated, are we a flipped classroom, inverted commas? Are we going to do our stuff in a very different way? And if we start doing it in a very different way, we then have the possibility to say, Alex, I'll take us to a key point. Before we flip, before we change, do we actually need to do a ground zero, all new, all existing and new workers in an organization, facilitation, facilitation skills to be a participant and to be the facilitator. That if people could be imbued with those characteristics, we then have a huge possibility to use technology in ways that won't replace meetings, but could very significantly enhance both the quality and the quantity of output that we get from potentially, Jim, your point, less meeting time, but potentially with much greater and much better productivity and output at the end of it.
Wow. How can you do that, Martin? I'm so impressed. You have a kind of super mind. You have a GPT-6 inside the brain to be able to do such a recap.
Yeah.
You are AGI.
Yeah.
I've been accused of being worse, Alex.
That's awesome. Anyway, friends, we are approaching the end. Alex, Jim, major takeaway from this conversation, and we wrap up for the day.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity, coming out of the pandemic. There's, return to the office, and people are struggling with hybrid and all these other things. And it's like, yeah, okay, there are those hurdles that you have to get over. But I think there's a bigger opportunity here, because I think now that we've had a taste of a completely remote, or another way, let's call it, we've had a taste of another way. I think now more than ever is the opportunity to do things like Alex was suggesting. Everybody who comes into my company gets facilitation training. Everybody who comes into my company learns a set of async habits. Right? That there's this huge opportunity right now, not just all the struggles that everybody's complaining about meetings and offices and stuff. It's like, no, that look at it the other way, right? That this is the opportunity to finally shift those big organizations.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. How about you, Alex?
My big takeaway is that I was very pessimistic. I surprised myself. I discovered a very weird part of myself that was hidden, because I'm totally optimistic. I see the glass half full normally in my life. And maybe it's a sign I should change. I should change industry. Anyway, yeah, I still think that there is a survey, a study that we've seen a lot, that says that one of the things that could make it possible to convince people that facilitation skills are necessary, there is a survey about the skills needed for the next 5 years. And I think that you have stuff such as creativity, collaboration, etc., etc. All these skills are skills that are not really trained. Yeah. There is no really training for creativity, for collaboration at school. So maybe it could be the data that we are missing to convince HR people, company, university managers, and stuff like that, and try to do exactly what Jim said.
Amazing. Okay, folks, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time here today. And thank you so much, dear viewers, for watching this. Your comments are valuable, and we look forward to see you again in the following month.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for the invite. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.